podcast listeners. Welcome to the Franchise Story Podcast. Today we have a special treat for you. We are at the 2020 IFA convention in Orlando, Florida, and we are talking with some amazing franchisors. I cannot wait to share their story and their insights with you. Hey, Franchise Story Podcast listeners. Super excited today to bring Don Fox, CEO of Firehouse Subs, from the 2020 IFA convention here in Orlando. Don, I'm super excited to have you on the show. You're one of the biggest franchisors that we've had on so far.
Thanks.
We just talked briefly a little bit about that you've been coming to the IFA conference convention for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. What is it that you get out of coming here?
Well, we're, as a brand, Firehouse Subs, we're in two businesses. We sell sandwiches, we sell franchises.
Okay.
Arguably, we've got to be great at the first one to begin with. If we're not great at selling subs, we don't have much to sell in the form of franchises. But when you come to IFA, it's that side of the industry. I mean, this is the business. So there's no other place where we can get the kind of exposure to the best practices that other brands, both inside and outside the restaurant industry. It's a great learning experience, great immersion, and we look forward to it every year.
Yeah, as a first-time attendee, it's really eye-opening to me what the scope. I mean, we know this, right? The statistics, there's 733,000 franchise locations in the United States, but that's an easy statistic. But when you come to a place like this and you see the full scope and scale of the franchise industry, it's amazing. It's powerful, and it makes me proud to be a part of it. As someone that owns locations and is a franchisee myself. So, you joined Firehouse in 2003 as the Director of Franchise Compliance before rising to CEO in 2009. The chain has 65 locations in 2003. Right. Now you've added almost 1,200 more locations during that time period. That's really an amazing growth story. The last two guests that we had on the show, they just hit 100, which is amazing. But to hit 1,000 plus is even that. So what has been the factors that have led to that explosive growth over really what's not a very long time period to have accomplished? I mean, I remember the first time I saw Firehouse Subs in a shopping center by my house, and I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The unit count may change, but the basics, the fundamentals remain as constants. So underneath it all, you just have to have a strong brand, especially if you're talking about getting to the 1,000 unit plus range. That goes without saying. Now, even an incredibly strong brand isn't enough. I mean, you need to couple that with other disciplines, managerial discipline, technical discipline, to make it all work. And I think we've been very, very good at that, and not just the disciplines in franchising itself, but restaurant operations. So, for example, you have to have a sound financial model for it, and then you have to protect that model going forward. A brand is a living, breathing thing over a long period of time. You don't get to 1,000 restaurants overnight. Right. The business model can go through many changes and disruption during that period. So, in management, you got to stay abreast of that. Keep it healthy, despite the outside influences. People selection is critical. That's where a lot of brands go wrong. You can have a fledgling starting brand, and they may only ever be as strong as those first few franchisees that come in the door. And if they're not strong, don't support the brand right, it never gets off the launch pad. We were very blessed in that manner. We had our initial cadre of franchisees were very strong.
So have you, over that time period, you've had a ton of different franchisees come through the door. If we're going to give advice to, an up-and-coming franchise brand that's maybe just getting ready to bring on their first 20 to 30 franchisees, which is the crucial time period for the brand, what advice would you give them about selection of the right franchisees?
Well, the main advice I would give them, frankly, would precede those decisions.
Okay.
Because I think the biggest mistake that some franchisors make is that before they start franchising, they don't have a fundamentally sound business model, don't have the cash flow, they're not in a financial position where they can afford to say no. Being able to say no when you're recruiting franchisees is the most important asset to have. And that is usually predicated on financial strength going into it.
Yes.
So assuming that you've done that and you're in a position to say no, then what you're looking for is people who are passionate and aligned with the culture. There's no perfect candidate. I mean, it's rare to have anybody walking in. It's no different in this respect than hiring an employee. We don't get polished gems and diamonds and walk in the door embracing every aspect of our brand or our culture. We've got to be good at coaching that up, developing people, but we got to see in them the potential to do it. That is so true of the franchise community, and to be aligned on the end game, if you will, the long-term goals, making sure we understand why they're getting into the business in the first place.
Was there a point where you're like, all right, this is going to be big. We are going to be one of the, and we talked a little bit before, there's only 38 restaurant brands that are over 1,000 locations. That's crazy when you think about the context of how many like franchise restaurants or even just multi-unit restaurants are out there. So was there a point where you're like, this is going to be big?
Well, if I go way back to the beginning in 2003 when I joined, there were, as you mentioned, 65 restaurants. Now, I came from the Burger King system, which at the time was the second largest restaurant company in the world. Only McDonald's was larger. So that was quite a contrast from however, I can't even remember how many units they have, but second largest down to this little...
it seemed tiny, right?
Tiny, small regional brand. But it was going back to the importance of branding. As I looked into Firehouse, and then I had the brand experience, the food, the culture of the restaurant, the service, the dedication to public safety, the celebration of first responders. We didn't have our charity yet in place. That came actually a couple of years after I arrived. But I saw that potential that the brand represented, and knew that as a long-time professional in the industry, if in the role I was coming into, if I applied everything that I'd learned over several decades already at that point, it had the potential to be cultivated and grow. Certainly, I knew that it was something that had the potential to grow beyond the 1,000 unit mark if we had that. And our vision for the brand has been to be about 2,500 restaurants nationally. Oh, wow. So we have a very clear vision on how our brand works in the whole ecosystem of consumers and restaurant rivals. And that's our ultimate domestic goal.
Yeah, that had to be exciting and maybe a little bit terrifying to go from such a big, stable system maybe at that point in time and jump on board to something that was kind of an emerging brand still.
Yeah. So exciting is more the word. Just because I often say, with all due respect to the Burger King brand, during my 23 years there, I learned a lot about what not to do. And then was in a unique position to make sure that as we developed Firehouse, that we didn't make some of those mistakes. And with all due credit to some of those old legacy brands, that in the realm of franchising, brands like Burger King more or less invented franchising, or certainly grew up through it, and so we're built on really the shoulders of the Burger Kings and the McDonald's, the other long-time franchising brands, and we'd be foolish not to benefit from all of their collective histories.
That's a really cool perspective to look at that way, because it's so true. Like we're pretty far into like this industry's development, and a lot of those companies really built that foundation for us or help do that. So one of the things that you mentioned is the charitable component of what Firehouse does. So tell us a little bit about what that is and like why is that important to the brand?
Of all the things that get me excited, the thing that gets me excited the most about our brand at this stage is what we do back in the communities. So our brand was founded by two firefighter brothers, and the motif, if you will, the whole theme of the restaurant is dedicated to firefighting and first responders. But in 2005, that was the point where we created the Firehouse Hubs Public Safety Foundation and directed a lot of the already substantial charitable work that we did in our communities directly towards the cause of supporting first responders. And that has grown now over 15 years into a cause that has fulfilled $48 million in grants for life-saving equipment and services to first responders. So whenever we open a new restaurant, we're still a growing, vibrant brand, and whenever we open a new restaurant, the thing that I get most excited about, that's a new trade area, a new community that we've got the capacity to go help, not just to feed and have a successful business, but to bring the opportunity forward to donate equipment, to have relationships with the first responders, and in the end, save lives. I mean, there's nothing more touching or motivating than when we hear the stories of people's lives that have been saved by equipment that's been donated through the foundation. it makes it a lot more than selling a sandwich.
Yeah, I mean that has to be not just for you, but other people on like in the organization, like a real meaningful reason to like go to work every day.
Oh, for the franchise, increasingly franchisees that come to us, or candidates that come to invest in the brand, more than ever, what we do in the community and their ability to immediately gain synergy with that is a very important part of their selection process for choosing the brand they want to invest in. Employees that work for our company-owned restaurants and franchise restaurants. These days, more than ever, whether it's millennials, Gen Zs now, in the workforce, they really attach a lot of value to working for a brand or a company that has that societal value. It's immeasurable in terms of the benefit.
And that has to like, it's amazing that you're doing so much good, but like even from a business perspective with such a low unemployment rate and so much competition over, the good talent out there, that has to be a huge benefit to where people can come in and feel like they're doing more than just making sandwiches.
It does. Hard to measure and quantify it, but there's no doubt. Just talking to and interacting with team members around the system, you know how important it is to them.
Yeah, so you've been in the restaurant industry for 45 years now, but you have a humble beginning. You worked as a dishwasher when you were 16. How has that affected your leadership style?
It makes me incredibly sympathetic and empathetic, choose your term depending on the nuances. The most valuable lessons that I ever learned in this industry that served me the best today are all the lessons I learned in the very earliest stages of my career.
Oh, wow.
From washing dishes. I often joke, the restaurant that I worked at, my very first job was an Italian restaurant, good old-fashioned, not my family, but a family-owned. Never forget the folks that were there, owned it, led it. And I'd be slaving over this 2-compartment sink. We didn't have 3-compartment sinks back then. There were 2-compartment sinks and no manual dishwashing. So at the end of the night, and anybody out there listening, you know what I'm talking about when I say this, you get the sauce pot at the end of the night. And that all of that sauce has been percolating in there all day to be used in all the recipes. You get it at the end of the night to clean it. And what you realize very early in your dishwashing career is your best friend is the person who stirs the sauce pot.
Okay.
Because the failure to stir it leaves you with an awful mess to clean up. So some of your most valuable lessons, that was one of them. Appreciate the role that everybody plays on the team, all of your teammates. Be kind, be generous, be friendly, be a team player. And then I go forward over the next few years when I first started entering into management roles at a very young age. You learn a lot of hard lessons really quick. And back in those days, and we're talking in the 1970s, didn't have the benefit of some of the training programs and techniques and so on that you have today to quickly elevate, let's say, people's business acumen. So it was a lot of trial and error too, and again, very valuable things. And then you think about, well, even to this day, the hardest job I've ever had was running a restaurant. And so when I see the role that franchisees have when they come in, they're running their first restaurants, especially when they come in as owner-operators, and then the general managers that come in, I know that every day, those are the people working the hardest in our brand. They work far harder than I do. I may bear more responsibility, maybe there's more at stake in the decision-making, but in terms of who wakes up in the morning and for the next 10, 12 hours is going to have the toughest gig, some people running a restaurant that day.
Yeah, it's awesome to have that perspective and understanding, having come up through all the roles. That has to give you, tons of credibility with your team, and that it's awesome to have a leader that's done that, not someone that just came from another Fortune 500 company and then rolled in. And restauranting is new.
I'll give you an example of how important it is. So one thing that I think is important for anybody in a leadership position is never forget that everything you do is always being watched and observed. You never escape that. The people you lead have a much greater capacity to watch and observe you, much more so than you have the capacity to observe them. So that manifests itself in so many ways. So for example, when I walk into a Firehouse Subs restaurant, I, like other team members, a benefit they get is to get a half price or a free meal. I am the last person who needs a free meal walking into a Firehouse Subs. I'm not going to walk into one of our restaurants, even the ones that we own, and get in line when I've got a team of, maybe there's 6, 7, 8 people working their tail off, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, working their tail off, and I'm going to get in line and enjoy the luxury of a free sandwich. I don't need it. In fact, when I know they're working so hard to make a profit, cash flow the best they can, and again, that's the last benefit I need to take advantage of. So when I over the years, I walk in and I'll insist, no, I'm paying. And by the way, also, if a customer happens to walk in behind me before I place my order, I'm stepping out of the line and they're coming forward. Those things get watched and observed and then appreciated by the people that you're leading. It all matters.
Did that leadership insight come to you naturally, or have you ever really struggled as a leader?
I think naturally by experience. Again, because I think it's just because I spent those early days in my career on the other side, on that side of the counter, working my tail off, just being so diligent and dedicated in those roles. And I've just never lost that perspective. So when I walk in, I'm seeing it through the eyes of those team members, the manager, the franchisee, and I deeply respect it. So it's just totally natural then to act the way I described. It would be unnatural to do otherwise.
It's truly your authentic self, right? It's like not something you have to work through, it's just who you are. So over 45 years in the restaurant industry, I'm sure a lot of things have changed. One of those biggest things has to be technology.
Right.
How has technology really changed the food industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact it's having is changing the consumer's behavior. In the general sense, people are changing how they're doing their shopping, just their retail shopping. How they're enjoying their leisure time. All of those things have the biggest impact on the restaurant industry. The industry's it's been tough because traffic in the industry, especially if you look at the top 500 brands or so, has been very soft. If you look at measures like Black Box, which is probably the best aggregator of empirical data. Negative traffic for going on 2 into 3 years. So it's despite a very good economy, it's not the best of environments that we've ever had. And that, in my opinion, that is heavily influenced by technology, how it changes people's traffic patterns. Because restaurants, a portion of restaurant traffic has always been linked to other types of activity. Especially if you look at the typical holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Peak shopping season, always a period over decades of higher usage of restaurants. Why? Because people are out of their normal traffic modes, or going out shopping, or after work changing their destinations for that. That has a greater tendency to get linked to restaurant visits. It's really great for the industry. But as more and more retail happens online, that is shrinking and compressing and gives us some real challenges. And then you've got, so that's the biggest impact, is just cutting into frequency and visitation. But then you get, on the plus side, our ability to harness technology to enter new channels of trade, digital ordering, online ordering, third-party delivery, all of these things. And technology is certainly a benefit in that regard.
I never thought how, it seems like more and more people are having the opportunity to work from home.
Right.
And how that could potentially be impacting, so I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of entrepreneurs that build, different types of businesses, and we're almost talking about is there really a point to have offices anymore?
Right.
It's kind of a new era where what is the value of that when we can do so much, remotely from a technology perspective?
Just anecdotally, if I've got an office place that 10 years ago had 200 staff members in it, but now through technology, 50 of those are displaced to their homes, maybe by their choice. Maybe they're given an option. They choose to work from home. In that particular trade area, I've got, if I'm a restaurant servicing it, I've got 50 less stomachs to have as potential guests. So that's something that I don't think has been studied enough in the industry. There's enough data on to really quantify the work at home force. And of course, what's happened is now, since most restaurant decisions are long-term decisions in terms of where they're located, consumers are changing faster than the real estate decisions. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
It has to be. That's a really interesting thing to kind of think about. So you've touched base on some of this already, but I just want to go through and ask this question because I do think it's a really good question. Is you're known in the franchise world as being a champion of Firehouse's legendary culture. How have you and other leaders been able to bring, you said by example, but bring Firehouse Sub's mission statement to life?
Yeah, it's a matter of, well, you have to walk the talk, you have to live by example, but we make sure in terms of our culture, I think it's very important for any brand, any company to be able to define, everybody has a culture.
Yeah, whether they choose to define it or not, right?
Right. And they'll let other people define it for them sometimes. You've got to be able to define it. Because for us, where the culture really manifests itself is in the service experience in the restaurant. But you can't be hypocritical. You can't have a sort of a different mentality or culture in your dealings with franchisees or what you do with your staff at headquarters. It's got to be throughout the organization. The most important place it's on display, and where it's on display predominantly in front of the customers in the restaurant. So great culture when you see it.
Right.
You walk into any place of business, everybody draws immediate conclusions and impressions on it. Firehouse is no different, but if you're waiting to have that great culture, if you think you're going to bring on team members or people into the organization and you're going to wait for them to just kind of get it through osmosis over time, it's too late. They're already affecting, perhaps in a negative way, culture of the business. So every advice for everybody out there is you've got to be able to define it so that you can coach it and train it in the very earliest stages, even during the interview process with the team member, to be able to articulate. So for us, it's about our mission statement. It may seem like a bit of a cliche. Ours is to carry on our commitment to and our passion for hearty and flavorful food, heartfelt service, and public safety.
It's good.
Strive to be number one at those three things in the marketplace and the total ecosystem of restaurants. Then we have 5 core values that we expect everybody to share. We look to align ourselves with people. And in some respects, you'd like to share your core values even with your customers.
Yeah.
That's not the nature of business. So you're open to everybody, all walks of life, all value systems. Anybody's come in and welcome to buy a sub. But your customers choose you based on your values.
That's a really good insight.
And so the more you have them on display, whatever. Chick-fil-A is a great example of it.
Yeah.
If you talk about that brand more than any, its values are on display. Its values are represented just by 2 words. My pleasure.
Yeah.
I could say that anywhere, and everybody's going to think these days of Chick-fil-A, even though Ritz-Carlton preceded them with the use of it. It's where the Kathy's got it. And then the third part of a great culture is every culture has embedded in it distinct behaviors. The thing, if you think about culture in a broader sense, if I'm talking about anthropology, a culture, a civilization, it's beliefs. There's a belief system as part of every culture. Not to get the risk of getting a little too academic here, but there's a belief system, and then the beliefs manifest themselves in behaviors that are in support of the beliefs. It's no different in a brand culture. So everybody needs to be able to define those things. We've done, I think, a very good job of articulating, describing those specific behaviors that are aligned with the beliefs of our brand, and your chances of success go way up if you're embracing those behaviors, which, by the way, can change over time. Nothing's static. Cultures change, and they can change for the better. And I think the same thing applies to brand cultures too. Yeah,
one of the best things I've ever done when it comes to building a team is taking our core values and making them a part of our actual hiring process and communicating those core values to potential people. And ours are, it's like in Good to Great, they say, good businesses aren't great places for everybody, right? Like, it doesn't mean it's for, not everybody's going to want to be part of your culture, which is not to be exclusive, because that's not the idea, but it's like, this is who we are, this is how we do work, and this is how we serve our clients. And if that doesn't resonate with you, there's a lot of opportunities these days. It just might not be the right one with us, because you're not going to like it.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, you're not going to like it. So in every major franchise success story, there's a moment of risk. And can you talk about a risk that you took to provide a defining moment in your career?
Yeah, when I think about in the context of Firehouse, when we entered into the recession, I want to say we had about 270-ish restaurants at that point. Still a Southeast regional brand, close to 300 restaurants, and in the early part of 2008, nobody really talked about it in the context of recession yet. It wasn't until about October when the proverbial, what hit the fan and everything really collapsed. But the recession was already deeply underway. And for the first time in our history, we were experiencing a very broad decline in same-store sales, going back to about late January, early February of that year. And after struggling for a couple of months of trying to reverse that, we working with our advertising agency at the time, different than our agency now, we really couldn't come up with something to take to the franchise community as a pathway forward. So we took a big risk. We did something very unusual, which some of my peers in the industry that I associated with at the time thought I was perhaps a little nuts for doing, but I stopped collecting the advertising money.
Okay.
We collect 2% that goes to the co-op, 1% to a system fund. Had to keep collecting the system fund money because it fuels the advertising agency retainer and some infrastructure costs on marketing. But I said, keep the 2%. Now, when I announced that, I was the most popular CEO on the planet Earth.
Yeah, I bet.
And franchisees, a common question, how long are we going to do that? I said, we'll do it for as long as it works. I have no pride of authorship, ownership. I want the same thing that you want, which is to profitably grow average unit volume.
Right.
That's the most important metric that I have for our brand, year after year after year. If we're doing that, everybody's winning. So we went back to good old-fashioned bootstrap, boots on the ground marketing, local restaurant marketing, which when done properly, I think it's always
the best.
It's going to be successful. It's the best way, but it takes a lot of work and effort. More than money, it takes hard work and dedication. And so we applied that, and myself, our founders, during the latter part of 2008 and 2009, we went out as a team all across the country, demonstrating
how to do
in the franchise community how to do it, taking them by the hand, going out, because not everybody could get out of it was out of their comfort zone sometimes to cold call businesses, but we had to try to teach them in some cases, coach them up. Unfortunately, it didn't work. We had about 30% of our system actually was able to lift sales and get into some good positive momentum. 70% didn't. And so that put us on a path, after taking a big risk to forgo the advertising dollars, then led us down the path of changing advertising agencies, coming up with a new campaign. We went completely opposite direction. Went to asking franchisees to double the advertising contribution.
Okay.
So imagine having had about a year where they're not paying anything in, and then I'm going back to them to say, well, not only are we going to start collecting the 2% again, we need you to double it.
Okay.
Voluntarily.
Yeah.
But that decision in the end up being the most important thing we ever did, because that was, by the time we put that in place after testing the media and so on, completely changed the trajectory of our brand when we were then leveraging and using advertising marketing in a different way. We've still enjoyed the benefits of that today. But that was the biggest risk move that we
you had to have massive credibility with your franchisees to even be able to make that request and have anyone participate in a time when they were probably struggling.
Well, going back to commonality of purpose, and not that I intended, I'd like to pretend that I was brilliant enough to have mapped all the way that whole story out from beginning to end. That's not the way it worked. We made our best attempt, did what we thought was the best thing to do at the time with not collecting the advertising dollars. But the perhaps unintended consequence was that in the absence of success, I mean, the franchisees can't, if you're a franchisee, you can't have perpetually declining sales. You're eventually out of business. They want success and sales growth as much or more than I do. So they had their chance. So many would have said, well, terrific, I'll keep the money, I'll go out there and I can market my business better. Well, it doesn't look like it. Not 70% of you can't. So it really gave us the moral authority to go back and say, all right, we let you try. Willingly, it was our idea. Nobody asked for that. But we let you take your shot. Obviously, we need to do something else. And now, if we hadn't tested it, that'd be a different thing. I'm a big believer in owning restaurants as a franchisor. We have 37 restaurants that we own and operate. We always have had a part of the portfolio was company restaurants. That was the foundation of the company, was having company restaurants before we really got into franchising, which was very important advice for any would-be franchisor. Having those restaurants gave us the capacity to test bring real results to the table. It wasn't, we weren't asking for a complete leap of faith. If they didn't have those company restaurants and the ability to test there, I don't think history would have gone the same way.
So did you test it both ways before you decided to get rid of the fund, and then before you decided to spend the fund?
We did not test getting rid of the fund.
Yeah.
So that was the bolder move, if you will. Yeah, again, very popular.
Oh yeah.
With franchisees, but that was because of it, in the absence of having a solution. Because to just throw money at advertising or into a marketing fund just for the sake of it, because you can, it does not seem like a legitimate or good faith use of the dollars. So again, I wish it had been successful. In many respects, life would be a lot easier if it was all self-directed and so on. But it's in the end not the best way to manage it.
Do you ever think that if you would have tried that in a different year or a different part of the economic cycle, that the outcome would have been different? 2009 would be a tough year to try it.
True. No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think even in the best of times, because I think underlying it was the fact that the capacity to gain results through those techniques of local restaurant marketing is almost entirely dependent upon the ability of the operator.
Yeah.
And just at least in our system, and I love our franchise community, and they are great at so many things, but they are not of equal talent across more than 500 of them when it comes to that marketing discipline and being able to get outside the four walls of their restaurants. So, and I don't think we're honestly any better at that today. When I look at even though we have a lot more franchisees, I would say the composition of the franchise community isn't that much different in respect to their talents in that arena than it was back in 2008 or 9.
That makes a ton of sense. As a multi-unit franchisee who's, I've had up to like 19 locations at one time, my process has always been to how can I mitigate the necessary, where you have to have a rock star to be successful. And I think that's what you see where you have a company that is primarily, trying to drive traffic through guerrilla marketing or local marketing. If you have someone that's amazing, they're going to produce amazing results. But if you have someone that it's not in their sweet spot, and for me personally, it's not. I'm not good at that particular activity. It's not where my skill sets actually lie. So I have sympathy for the other franchisees that I've done it, I've made it work, but I don't necessarily enjoy that part of the business.
And that's why if you're a multi-unit operator that, let's say, you get enough scale that you can build, you have the cash flow, if you can put the right person in the role to go and help with that. But when you're especially a smaller, well, still, I would, I'll stop myself in my tracks here, is even with almost 1,200 restaurants, the majority of our franchisees do not have the scale in their organization where they would be in an easy position to go hire the person to go do that. So for the majority of people, hundreds of them, it still is about them and their capacity and talent at going out to do that. We train on it. We make it part of their initial 8-week training program is doing door-to-door grassroots marketing with their area representatives. Yes. But certainly the results can vary quite a bit. So mainstream marketing becomes a bit of the great equalizer. Yep. But I still emphasize this with candidates when they come in. Don't think that it's going to be that easy, that we can run commercials or digital or whatever, and that's going to cure all your woes. It won't. Because the better you are at the local restaurant market, it just means you're going to be that much better on the sales front.
Sure, absolutely. Yep. What actually happens in the four walls a lot of times drives the real result, right? We can do a lot of things on the marketing, but delivering a good product, delivered the right way, is going to be a huge part of it.
Very often marketing, especially when you get into media and so on, it's just providing a top layer of sales. You have a core foundation of your business.
Absolutely.
That's just driven on the integral elements of the brand and the experience. Bad operations will be, actually both sides of bad operations will do more to depress your sales than anything
bad marketing
that your competitors or bad marketing or anything else. That's going to be the primary thing that runs off customers. On the flip side, superb operations are going to be much more impactful. More often than not, much more impactful than anything you're doing on the market, especially if you rise to that superstar status.
I agree 100%. Have a marketing agency, but I believe that fundamentally great operations. doesn't put as much pressure on your marketing.
And by the way, and the more consistent and high level your operations are in the brand, the more arrows you can put in the quiver of the marketing firm.
It's true.
Because you can't go out and talk about things that you can't deliver on.
Yep.
So you want to give them as much ammunition as possible.
So since we're here at IFA and the IFA conference, and the majority of attendees are probably franchisors, and one thing that I just consistently see over and over is franchisors and franchisees struggling to navigate the relationship and that unique relationship between them. I mean, fundamentally, their franchisees are your client, and they're also your responsibility kind of at the same point. Like how do you, like, I know from a leadership and example perspective, but how do you coach your team members at the corporate level when it comes to dealing with franchisees that maybe don't fully understand what you guys do and how hard you work for them and don't appreciate it?
Well, one of the things that I think this is a fundamental belief of mine when it comes to franchising. Franchisees aren't our clients.
Okay.
They aren't our customers.
Okay.
Franchising is franchising.
Okay.
Franchising is its own unique business model. It is not like anything else.
All right.
That's a big mistake I think a lot of people make when they try to draw similes and comparisons. It's just not.
All right.
Franchising. There's a contractual relationship.
Okay.
As a franchisor, I have distinct things that I have to do under that contract. Franchisee has distinct and separate things. Our interests overlap. We have common concerns and interests, but the things we have to do are uniquely ours. And you have to couple that with great communication and elements of fairness. Now in that relationship, certainly the franchisor, I'm not telling you anything, saying anything that anybody doesn't know or feel intuitively. The franchisor does hold, what's the way I should say it, in some respect, a certain advantage. The brand formula is theirs. They own the brand. They're licensing the use of it, if you will, to the franchisee. So the franchisor has a whole set of interests for the overall health, not only of their company and the brand, but of all the entire franchise community. So the franchisor's interests and concerns are much broader than
a single unit
any
performance.
single unit. Because, for example, if you've got a franchisee who's not living up to their part of the contract,
Packs everyone.
right? If you're a great operator on one side of town and you know that a franchisee of your same brand on the other side of town is doing a crappy job, you're not happy.
Oh yeah.
Because your lunch customer potentially lives on the other side of town, and you know if that customer's first experience with the brand is going to be a dinner one night, your chance of getting them as a lunch customer is greatly reduced. So who's going to take care of that? Franchisee A, the great operator, is probably not going to pick up the phone and call franchisee B and say, hey, I'm getting complaints about your... Maybe they will, but you know what? Franchisee B is really bad. They could care less.
Yeah.
And they'll blow that off. If they cared, they'd be in better shape than what they are. So as franchisor, that's my role. There's that compliance end of it, which is an important part of being a franchisor. So the important thing, I think, for me in the relationship is I have to be always empathetic to the situation that the franchisee has. As long as a franchisee in our system is doing everything that is fair to be expected of them, I am in their court all day, doing everything I can to help them succeed. Because I'll always hold up my end of it. I do everything that's expected of us to do as a franchisor. If they're not doing everything that's fair to be expected, I'm going to have a different, quite simply, I'm going to have a different approach to it. Fortunately, I've got a lot of great franchisees. Now, that's not to say from time to time we haven't had challenges. I've had to terminate franchise agreements. I've had to close restaurants. But we've not had any franchise litigation, which is very rare.
Right.
Open up our FDD,
Yep.
there's nothing there. But again, that's despite having to make hard decisions. Why? Because great communication coupled with fairness. You do those two things as a discipline as a franchisor. It's advice I would give to any franchisor out there. And by the way, the franchisee should expect that. May not be in your contract, but I think in a good relationship, a franchisee should be expecting fairness and great communication from their franchisor. Couple those things, and there really shouldn't be anything two well-intentioned parties can't work through.
Yeah, it's such a good way of explaining franchising. And I think I'll never use the example of the client relationship again, because you're right. It is a completely unique business, like way to structure a business and grow a business and to treat it accordingly. I like the idea of like, I've got a contract of what I have to do, you have a contract of what you have to do, and then and understand where our lanes are and make sure that we're both excelling in those lanes. That's awesome.
Which, by the way, I would add that having involvement, I think in the case of Firehouse, we're a closely held private company, and so it's not a democracy. It's, we make the decisions we have to make. We think are in the best interest of our brand, which, by the way, are not separate and apart from the best interests of the franchisees that help build and operate the brand. But having their voice is of critical importance as we go about making decisions in the brand. So many years ago, I allowed the franchise community to, in essence, form its own franchise association. Elected people. I've never done advisory councils that we handpick and people on this, because for almost every major brand has a franchise association, and it's usually born out of adversity.
Right.
And that's a good thing. So years ago, I recognized, look, I'm going to really set up an environment here where it can be governed well, it's funded, the franchise community elects their representatives who are going to go in here. In the meantime, I'm officially recognizing them. I'm recognizing all their subcommittees. So we have a constant stream of franchisee feedback that I can take into account for our decision-making process.
That's such a powerful idea, to not be afraid of your franchisees organizing against you and actually embracing it. And I'm sure that they, at some level, even if they didn't know it, really appreciated it. That's awesome. Well, Don, you've given us a ton of wisdom, and I really appreciate you taking the time today to be on the show. It was awesome.